Fáilte go video alle as an ré ac in seo ag cumanechtri scíd y bhach. Video y lániu, video echtriol. Hamis minach as na bleonig in a rún gymí a recyn mar echtriol. Has in bio a naw ha caran anasoch. Am y gyrd y gymi uamasoch cwtrmoch. Has in y fadar be, mysio coiw, chofad agos sa cain ac am yrfi brin mae un y fawri. Charwacin ach bawri, son be fawr chwtiacin. Narna bawri jalosach. Tri fichyd bleon y dich ar y chrwn. Ach, yn warsen, mae'r higyr choldynnu, hanig basor. Fasyn, rwyd ag yn open ac yn diadag, ach, neisyn sé ni fawn y fat dŵl rys, agos y gyrdig dŵl y rys, agos machaniwn diach môr an olwch o'i gianw, haris ar ymwg bleonu. Has yn i ffordd noch yn y sio, gyfel, môr ar yna diach rŵn, y Lord Lieutenant ac yn y sio, agos fe'n an, agos fan nis achos yn an y Westminster ac yn tiolog, agos yma ein sy'n hyfydio la yn diw. Briefly, that was just a short word or two to introduce today's video from Coinneach MacIomhair. We are marking the passing of Queen Elizabeth II, the Queen for all or most of our lives. It is so difficult now to get used to saying King Charles III. Iain Macaulay is the Lord Lieutenant of the Western Isles. He and Anne, his wife, were at the funeral in Westminster Abbey. And tonight I want to find out what it was like to be at this historic occasion. We saw it on the television, they saw it in real life. First of all though, Iain, and apart from anything else, this is so unusual for me to have to speak to you in English. I don't think I've ever done it before. Explain a little about your own role generally as the Lord Lieutenant.
Yeah. Well, the Lord Lieutenant in any county, and in my case the Western Isles, we're the King's representative, His Majesty the King Charles representative here in the Western Isles. And 6 months ago, when I was appointed Lord Lieutenant, it was Her late Majesty the Queen who appointed me as her representative. And since her death in September, I am now the King's representative here in the Western Isles.
We're going to make that mistake a few times, probably. Everybody else is. It's so difficult to get used to the fact that we're not talking about the Queen anymore, isn't it?
Absolutely, and I think because, as you said in your introductory remarks, she has been such a key part in our lives, most of us, throughout our lives. And I think that's why we've seen such an outpouring of grief, not just in the United Kingdom, but also throughout the world. People have respected her service and know through her passing that we have lost a remarkable public servant at the end of the day. That's what she was. And when she gave a promise, when she came to the throne, she kept that. And that was mentioned in the service at Westminster, just about how she kept to these original promises.
I know that you didn't expect to be this busy in the new role when you took it on. It has been a very busy time. First of all, you had the 70th anniversary. I think that had never happened before in this country and probably will never happen again. Mm-hmm. Joy, celebration, and then the complete opposite, the death, the funeral.
That's very true, and so only 3 months apart. So joy of 70 years of Platinum Jubilee. The country came out in great numbers in various ways to celebrate the Queen. And although her health at that time was beginning to fail, but she did manage to come onto the balcony at Buckingham Palace as part of the Jubilee weekend celebrations. And that was a great lift, a great morale booster to the nation at the time, and underlies her determination to remain being a public servant.
Which she did until the very end when she welcomed the new Prime Minister 2 days before she passed away. But there were preparations for this eventuality for many, many years. I think going back 40 years even, somewhere when it started first of all. How aware, as the Lord Lieutenant, were you were you of the preparations that had been made?
Yes, we're engaged continually over the years, and if you look, at this is the guide to the role of Lord Lieutenants, and in that is giving guidelines on two things. One was Operation London Bridge, which was the national plan on the demise of the Queen, and should she pass away in Scotland, Operation Unicorn. And we shouldn't be surprised that Her Majesty, the late Queen, died in Scotland, because she spent almost 3 months a year, almost a quarter of the year in Scotland every year. And Operation Unicorn is detailed in about the procession, the planning of the procession from Balmoral to Holyrood House in Palace in Edinburgh, the service in St Giles. And we now know that the Queen herself was involved in the planning of that, and that gave you a sense of a feeling of her presence during these services that we saw. St Giles televised. I wasn't, neither myself or Anne were at the service in St Giles in Edinburgh, but the Gaelic singing, the psalms, the hymns, the biblical readings, they were all there under direction from the Queen herself and during the planning process.
So what happened wouldn't be a surprise to anybody who had been in on it, and many people had been in on it at different levels over many years. As an aside, another person with back roots was very much involved in the process of us seeing what happens. That's John Smith, Mac Katrina Forsen from Abercall also, who was, I believe, involved at St Giles and also at Windsor in the televising of the event. So there was a caloric presence there, that more so than any other village in the island, and we can be quite proud of that, even in the wider Lochatua area. We all heard the news the day the Queen died. How soon were you aware of it?
Lord Lieutenants were made aware just immediately after there had been the public announcement, so not before. So we didn't have any privileged information before then. So it was sitting at this very table, although because of the Queen's ill health that day and that being made public, a meeting had been held between the various agencies led by Corlin and Yelenshire, who had a detailed plan in place for such an event, and we had a meeting at 4:30 that afternoon, and when I came back home, that's when officially heard on the news that Her Majesty had passed away.
It's very well having plans, it's very well having rehearsals, but then the reality hits home. It has happened.
Yeah, and I think there are some of the planning. It's a fairly structured one about flags going to half-mast, organising, this national service at St Giles. There was the presence of Lord Lieutenants throughout that east coast of Scotland, from Balmoral, down to Edinburgh, engaging with that. But the police Scotland, politicians, the clergy, the armed forces, but also opportunities given throughout within the planning process for the public to be engaged en route from Balmoral in safe ways, safe avenues presented through security systems from Police Scotland to enable the public to engage. And Scotland, we must say, did our nation proud, but particularly the dignity and the solemnity in which they participated in the Queen's journey from Balmoral to Holyrood Palace, then from Holyrood Palace to St Giles, St Giles to the airport, and that iconic television shot of the Queen flying out of Edinburgh, and we knew for the last time leaving Scotland.
It's interesting, Anne, hearing the explanation of the preparations and all the rest of it. I don't know how much you were party to the preparations or anything like that, but then when the news came, how soon did you realise that you had to be part of this?
Well, it's part of the protocols as well that you know that you have to be prepared for the Queen's demise. So we've always been prepared with mourning clothes ready to go. But I think maybe Ian downplays a wee bit the work that he had to do, because there, from the minute it became clear she was ill, phone was going here all the time. Emails from the Lord Chamberlain's office, Buckingham Palace. Just he was involved in a lot of admin work, which I was able to help him with. But the reality is that we always knew that the day that the Queen died, that the Lord Lieutenant and spouse would be invited to the Lying State and the funeral. So we always knew whenever it was going to happen that we would be expected to make our way to London.
Expected to happen, but then it happens.
Mm-hmm.
How did you feel?
I think initially that there's a sort of natural reaction that I as a Christian woman, I was glad in a way that she had a release from, the trials of this world in a way. But then there's a kind of practical element that kicks in, and while everybody grieves in their own way, we were able to demonstrate our support and grief for the monarchy, really, by going and doing all this organising that Ian had to do, and lots of meetings, and directing people on what to do. So in a way, I'm not even sure we're still on a kind of roller coaster. I don't think we've fully grasped the whole thing yet. But my initial act in it was that she was free from pain.
That's really why I wanted to do this video just now, because while it's still fresh in your minds, and that we could actually capture the feelings of the time as well as the actual actions of the time, because there is no doubt this was a historic occasion, and you were there actually representing us.
Yeah, absolutely. And very mindful of that.
Yeah. So you were saying, I'm just this idea of Buckingham Palace and all these places being touched with the house and but call again. I'm finding it difficult to get used to. How difficult was it for you to kind of grasp that was so and so, that was so and so?
Yeah, I know. Since Ian became Lord Lieutenant, there's been quite a bit of that. When he's been on Zoom calls to people in the royal household and fairly senior people. I'm not saying you get used to it. I don't think you ever do, but there is. And I confess there still is a sense of, how is this happening to us? So there is still, we have to take in what's actually happened. And we've learned a lot about being a Lord Lieutenant. Aside from all these other things, there's a lot of work involved. And I think he's been down to London about 5 times already this year, backwards and forwards, and we just never expected any of that. Mm-hmm. So just the day-to-day work of a Lord Lieutenant, and this is all on top of it.
You said you remember back Free Church, and we saw these church services in St Giles, the one you were at in Westminster and the one at Windsor, and they were very profound in many ways, very simple in many ways also, but probably a shock to many people in a sense.
Mm-hmm. I think there definitely was a shock, and you sensed that when you were in London. We were very privileged to be inside the security barriers of lots of things, and you were just seeing these rivers of people that had queued for hours and hours to go to the Lying State, and there was still is a kind of surreal feeling to it all. But there's one of the things that really struck me about the whole thing is there seemed to be, maybe this was more in the funeral, but there seemed to be a clear dividing line between the ceremonial and the funeral service, and then ceremonial again. And that was something that struck me, even as we were sitting and looking at the order of service, and I thought, wow, this is authorised version, full of psalms, as you said, a very simple funeral, really. But I found it quite interesting that any ceremonial was before and after, and there's undoubtedly her hand in that.
Well, indeed, simple in many ways, Ian, but not simple at all. Huge amount of organisation in which you had to play a little part yourselves.
Yeah, I think speaking about the London and our experience in London, as you mentioned. We live in Upper Call, come from US, live on an island, and the crowds in West London, were immense. You couldn't walk on the pavements; you shuffled and just made your way along. And what struck me for somebody coming from a rural living experience was the courtesy and the friendliness and I suppose the unity of that public stream of people, people were here together. They were mourning the loss for various reasons. People were mourning the loss of the Queen. And for us at that particular point, I think I've got to mention the security services. Lots of police, lots of security staff, armed forces, but about professionalism, calmness, but ever alert, and the fact that this enormous public gathering, outpouring of grief, public organisation, that it's passed safely and so well organised.
Now, you were privileged to be able to be present at the Lying in State, which we saw on the television here. Explain how you got there.
Well, we got there first of all, as Anne was saying, we knew that the Lying in State, that we would, Lord Lieutenant plus spouse, would get an invite. And part of that was we were then broken up into groups throughout the United Kingdom of Lord Lieutenants, and we were given 4-hour viewing slots. So around that time you had to organise, and you were met outside near the House of Lords, given tickets after going through a number of security postings, and then we were taken under the road in a tunnel under the House of Lords, and then came out onto the side door inside the Lying in State in Westminster Hall, and taken up the left-hand side steps onto the platform there. And I must say that was my first, I was sad, it was solemn, but it caught you there, caught your breath, because there was silence, but also seeing the people flowing through in 2 rows, showing their own respects, some crossing, some bowing, some courtesy, others doing, salute. And that, the silence, some were crying, others were just walking past slowly. But as everyone left, I think everyone seemed to turn back and have one final look at the coffin before leaving the hall. And that was quite profoundly moving, because people were looking back, saying, "This is me seeing, the Queen, or being in her presence for the last time."
Iain Macaulay, North Uist and Colorado, standing in the same place where Joe Biden stood.
Yeah, it was a privilege and an honour, and it's one you feel. That caught my breath, being in the Lying of State, because you had the Crown, the Queen, the guards, and we had changing of the guard as well experience while we were in. So, as Anne was saying, you had the solemnity of the Lying in State and the quietness of that, and then the ceremonial of the changing of the guards.
Such a big event done, and yet such a small presence.
Yes, it all feels quite intimate, really, when you're in the middle of it. More so perhaps at the funeral, but at the Lying in State, you're standing there and you're just thinking, how come we're here? It's a very personal thing. It's amazing that we're here, but definitely a sense of you could almost touch everything. Coffin very small, even the crown very small. I don't know why everything felt so small. And maybe it's this enormous historic hall that we were in, but there was an intimacy about it that was really quite profound.
Yes, I've actually been in that hall more than one time, and most of the time, there is nothing there. It's between the House of Lords and the House of Commons, and although there are many important occasions there, most of the time there isn't anything there apart from some statues and things like that. Was there how long were you able to stand there?
We were allowed, well, we could stay as long as we wanted, he said, yeah. But then some Japanese dignitaries came in, and there gets to a point where you feel you have to go because, there are other people wanting to get there as well.
But that itself is strange, isn't it?
Yeah.
That you didn't feel like a sausage factory or anything like that.
Not at all.
No, everyone was given time, although there were all these time pressures outside with so many queuing and trying to get so many through the door. And when you ask about somebody from North Uist, somebody from Coinneach, you also, or I felt when at the lying in state, is the Queen would like this, that there was somebody from each area of the United Kingdom. She loved the Western Isles. She visited us 3 times, and so having representation from the Western Isles was important because we also loved her. So it was a two-way relationship in as far as the Queen and the Western Isles was concerned.
Now, this is the invitation card for the sitting line. Now, this is the invitation card for the line in state. You had one each of them. This now is the one for the funeral itself. And here we have indeed the order of service. We were watching this on the television, and believe it or not, Coinneach MacIomhair saw the two of you and saw the seats you got. And I was saying, well, you're jammy. How did you actually ended up, although you were right at the back of the church, you ended up in really good seats at the funeral itself, didn't you?
Yeah. Yes, they were beside the west door, and that's where the remains came through for the service, and then left, to go to Windsor. And that's where the royal family walked past us, and the world dignitaries and the world leaders. Because we were at that end, everyone had to go past us to go in, but also to come out. We ended up there because we had these tickets which took us to that particular area, and then we were shown by a steward, asked how many of there were, and there was 3 of us. There was a gentleman from Edinburgh who was there on his own, and he was with us. So we were coming through security and the queuing in the morning, and we were shown to these 3 seats, and they were amazing in terms of adding to the experience of being there.
We actually were able to do various things, and we were able to watch the television and that kind of thing. But you had to be there very early, didn't you?
Mm-hmm, yeah, I think we got the taxi from the hotel about 7 in the morning, before 7. Yes, and by the time you went, we were there very early, which another reason that we managed to get a decent seat as well had a lot to do with it, I think. And we were seated by about 8 o'clock, back of 8 maybe, half 8.
20 past 8, yeah.
And that was us until we left at half 12. A long time to sit.
Yeah.
But you don't feel the time long, because you're busy people, I'm busy people watching, and there's something going on all the time. I think we both were very mindful of the fact that there was a whole world going on outside that people at home like yourself would be watching, that we weren't privy to. So we were in this, again, that, I know Westminster Abbey's huge, but it felt almost private in this building, and we were at a funeral, and the outside ceremonial wasn't happening inside, and it was just beautiful music, and watching, just looking at the beauty of the building we were in.
You were, as you say, you were people watching, and there were certainly plenty of people to watch.
Oh, indeed.
What did you feel when they were so close to you? Because they were very close to you.
Very close, yes, and more so even when they went out, because they were all the European monarchs and the heads of state and our own royal family were stopping right beside us, or they were queuing to go out. So you got very, very close to them. I think one of the first things, well, actually, on the way down, I just thought how classy and how gracious our royal family are. They just looked the part. They just carried it off beautifully. On the way back, when I was seeing the King of Spain and the King of Sweden and all these sort of people, they're just ordinary people. They're not. We maybe give them a status. Their position is the status, but at the end of the day, they're just ordinary people.
When you mentioned our own royal family and this kind of thing, you know, the eyes of the world on them when they're actually grieving so much, a mother, a grandmother.
Yeah. I think that's perhaps their great skill, that they're able to maybe compartmentalise their own feelings and perform this ritual, because let's face it, that's what it's a ritual. And maybe it's not that different from, you know, people in Broad Bay who are grieving and still have to go through the ritual, the motions of going to the funeral, just the practicalities of what you have to do. So maybe in all our worlds, all our experience, we have to do what they've had to do, but to a greater degree, of course.
Now, there was a lot of activity going on outside the church. You know, what was the feeling like when you were becoming aware of there was something happening outside and it was coming closer to you?
Very powerful experience. As I said, the end doors, the west doors of the Abbey were open, and Westminster Hall isn't far away. So you could hear the pipe and drums beginning to play in the distance, and you knew then that the cortege was on its way to the Abbey, and it got nearer and nearer and louder. Gaelic tunes, Scottish tune, and you could feel within the building, within the Abbey, an emotional ripple, because that touched people's heartstrings, but they also knew that the Queen's coffin was going to be coming through the door shortly, and ultimately it reminds you that's why you were there, and for all that was going on around you, and you couldn't help but admire the building. Hugely impressive. The music inside it. Also, the people watching that, Anne was mentioning. But then you're back to reality, and the reality is mourning the loss of the Queen, and your presence, trying to be respectful in that sense, and support them in their private but yet public mourning.
Yes, it seemed to me more than once that I felt Charles was, the king now, was struggling. That you could see in his face, what Anne was saying, the compartmentalisation was not working as well as he would have liked. But on the other hand, that gave him a very human face.
Mm-hmm. I think you're right. I think that it did give a human face, but he was he must be tired. When you think what he and the family had gone through in this public way as well, and all the decisions, although everything's all decided, there are still lots of last minute decisions that he would have had to make, and other members of the royal family. So it's a strain as well.
And then we had the service itself.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Again, it was back you felt the ceremonial all ended. Everybody who was suited and booted it all was stopped, and as soon as the reading started, that's when you just felt you were in somebody's funeral. I thought Baroness Scotland spoke beautifully, a very difficult chapter, Corinthians, I think it's 15. I'm saying it's difficult if it's not read well, and she just read it perfectly. The Psalms, Crimond. Probably most of us have been brought up with Crimond, but to hear it with the descant and the choir singing, breathtaking, absolutely breathtaking. And again, when I saw the ceremonial order of service, Psalm 8, Psalm 42, I just loved the fact that the Queen had picked her own special psalms and readings because it felt very, very much like her. This was what she wanted.
That she was actually giving a message.
Oh, I definitely think so. I definitely think she was giving a message. And one of the good things, again, as a Christian woman, she made, as I said, an unashamedly Christian funeral, prepared for herself, but she didn't exclude anybody. You know, she had the Arabs there, she had the Jews there, she had readings from all different faiths. Well, not all different faiths, they were mostly Christian faiths, but there was no sense that any faith group was excluded, because we saw them all going past us, all sorts, and they were there, perfectly aware they were coming to a Christian service. I suspect they didn't expect it to be quite almost Presbyterian in its style, but she died a Presbyterian, because she dies in Scotland. You are automatically, if you're a member of the Church of Scotland, you die as a Presbyterian. So she didn't actually die in the sense of a Church of England. She had a Scottish Presbyterian death.
There are many almost subplots to the story, and that is indeed one of them, and some of them almost to the level of being subliminal. But so the service, we all saw the service. You're saying the singing and that was fantastic, and the music within the church, and then the rest of us were at home and could see what was happening for the rest of the time. I have to confess, after the service, I went out to dig some potatoes and then came back in time to see the one at Windsor. What happened in Westminster Abbey when the actual funeral was over?
Anne mentioned, you know, it took some time for the royal family to leave, and they were led first of all by the clergy, and you know, you've got to see how well organised in the different dresses, different costumes, etc. So the colour, the pageantry was amazing. Took some time to leave the church, and once we left the church, you spoke to people outside, reflected on their service and asking how did you know. So there was some discussion and chat with people round about us, and I knew, you know, a small number from the lieutenancy, so we were together with them for a short time, and then. I had agreed, Darren Link from the BBC had been in touch and to see if I would do some Gaelic radio, so that was at 1:30. So while we were waiting to go across to the BBC outside broadcast unit, that's where we saw, you know, because we were on that side of the security barriers, we saw President Joe Biden and two of his cars that you know, his own personal safety cars were there, and that, you know, made me reflect on the Queen and the impact that she had on world leaders, that they would 10 days after her death would stroke a couple of days out of their busy schedules and diaries and give travelling to London to her late Majesty the Queen's funeral. That priority speaks how much they valued her, respected her, but also that they felt the need to be present at her funeral.
Nothing to do with the funeral really, but when you said about Joe Biden's car, you saw Joe Biden himself.
Yes.
Is he as spotachol as they claim he is?
Yes, I think you know, walking past, you're aware, but some of that's influenced, I think, by what we see on television. He's actually very lean and straight, you know, as an individual going past. And yes, you're aware from television that he's, you know, in his late 70s, and some of the image that's projected on him. So no, in terms of just passing by in that instant, you wouldn't think that he is anything other than fit and healthy.
So there you were, a couple from Upper Col, Lord Lieutenant of the Western Isles, at this state funeral, having had the opportunity to be at this once in a lifetime occasion. What were your immediate feelings as you walked away from it, Anne?
Apart from exhaustion, I think again it's that surreal feeling, and I don't think we fully processed the enormity of what we've done, because we were on an administrative roller coaster till we got there, and then even coming back, you know, flying home that night and just being on the go the whole time. Walking away from it all, I had this overwhelming sense of privilege. It's a word that's overused, I think, sometimes, but it was a true sense of privilege. And I'm very mindful that I'm only there because I'm married to the Lord Lieutenant of the Western Isles. But I was very conscious I was using for myself the word privilege. What a privilege to be here, having been so critical of people just tripping the word out all the time.
And bringing it down to my own level and all elderly gentlemen here, how on earth do you last from 7 o'clock in the morning till 1 o'clock without needing to go to the toilet?
Yes, I think in the morning we probably ate and drank. We had breakfast at about 20 to 7 in the morning, and then that was us through. So, I suppose for me that day there was an element of good luck that I didn't need to leave my seat. And
did anybody actually?
Oh, people did.
Did
yes.
Yes,
Oh,
people,
yes.
yeah.
Yes.
Honestly, I did wonder about that.
Not during the service,
No,
but,
oh, no,
you know,
no.
Oh,
but
yeah.
before the service,
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, because you were then, by the time you had left security, etc., and you know, London, the roads were quiet and empty because of security round. So most of the roads around the Abbey and Westminster Hall had been cordoned off. So you had this strange bit of no traffic, payments packed. And that was, you know, it's pretty surreal, really, in terms of quiet at one level, the middle of London. Mm-hmm. And we were down on a recce on Sunday afternoon. We went down to see where we had to report to, etc., because we were told to come to security beside the Houses of Parliament at 7:45 in the morning. So on Sunday afternoon we went down for a recce, and you could hardly move. With the public, and that's probably because it was a weekend, but people with very young children, babies, people in buggies, and you know, listening to the chat. I wasn't speaking to them, but hearing them beside me, you could, because you were that close to people, you could not but overhear people's conversations. And it was about bringing their child, because they wanted their child to be told that they were part of this historic occasion, that they had been here. And I heard, you know, one father talking about he had lived outside London, but he had to experience it. He had been moved sufficiently to bring his family to London to experience what he was seeing in television.
You know, a thought struck me also, Iain, that you'd be as well just to give up the lieutenancy now, because you'll never ever, during the course of no matter how long you're a Lord Lieutenant, experience what you've just experienced in the first few months.
Yeah. It's been an incredible experience. In one sense, it is pretty overwhelming when you see somebody who appointed me, the Queen, in March, no longer here. Now, when I took up the appointment, you know, as you do in your own head, you think, you know, the Queen will have another few years, and that's what, you know, I'd hoped for. That's what I kind of guessed, I suppose, in my own mind. So her passing, you know, was a shock, and then, you know, from there on, because there are protocols, because there are guidelines. So for me as Lord Lieutenant here in the Western Isles, the real people who had to start the real work were the people who were going to be conducting services, conducting security services, conducting, you know, the logistics from Balmoral to, you know, Edinburgh, and then down to, and then, you know, it's afterwards when we came back that we looked at the service in Windsor, and that was amazing. Mm-hmm. And the crowds that were there, and you know, one of a family friend, the Reverend Kenneth Mackenzie, who is the Church of Scotland minister at Crathy, comes from Inverness, and he's taking part, you know, in the service at Windsor, a very close aid to the Queen. And then within the service at the Abbey, you had Reverend Dr. Ian Greenshields, also, whose mother comes from Nessa, is current moderator of the Church of Scotland. So these connections, Findlay Macaulay, of 4 Scots from Lochboystill, he was piping at Windsor. So it's good to have Highland participation, and to know that her funeral was truly covered the whole of the United Kingdom in its various connections.
It has been fascinating listening to this recording and recounting of such a recent experience. And our purpose in doing this for the Coinneach is that what is for you a recent experience will soon be seen as a very historical and important experience. And my thanks and the Coinneach's thanks indeed to the 2 of you for being able to sit here with us tonight and recount this, and maybe help yourselves also try kind of to process it further, because what we have been doing is looking at this very important occasion, the state funeral of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, on Monday the 19th of September 2022. And from me, Coinneach MacIomhair, on behalf of Coinneach, I hope you've enjoyed it and will be with us for the next one.